Welcome to the Exodus and Beyond. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. This video series will be exploring the Exodus from an esoteric understanding as explored in my book, The Exodus and Beyond, Book 2 of Unlocking the Dream Vision. In this video we'll begin exploring the mystery of the gods, Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and don't forget to subscribe for future videos. This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one to the many mysteries we will explore. Although our ancient ancestors were unaware of the broader political factors at work for the gods, we can infer several things if we take a closer look at the Emu-Ish. The Emu-Ish is the Babylonian creation myth, which is commonly also known as the Seven Tablets of Creation. Although the myth is not as complete as the Greek version that we explored in the last video, it is believed to be the oldest version of the Serpent-Slaying myth that is known. It is also thought to be the earliest version of the myth and thereby the closest to the original of the Proto-Indo-European version. Since we are aware of how the twin brothers led the Indo-European speaking tribes of Israel around the world, which also in the process destroyed the Bronze Age civilization while establishing a new world order of devotion and service to the gods during a second phase of the Exodus. We can understand that there's a direct connection between the Seven Tablets of Creation, the oldest and possibly earliest version of the story of these people, and the much later Greek version, which is the last one to be established and remembered. This knowledge allows us to piece together several parts of the myth that help provide a slightly more precise pictures of the gods or Terran's political situation and what was going on. Within the Babylonian version, the Serpent-Slaying myths, the chain of events unfolds in essentially the same manner as the Greek version, with one noticeable difference. In this version of the myth, the Earth Mother and the great monster that she is said to have spawned for the final battle with the new supreme god are actually one and the same creature and not actually separate entities as remembered within the Greek version. In the Seven Tablets of Creation, this monstrous creature is known as Tanamit, which was normally viewed as somewhat of an ambiguous character. In the beginning of the myth, she is viewed as a great mother-like figure. However, later in the myth, she is transformed into the primary antagonist. As with the Greek version, the Sky Father, who was known as Apus, which is the Babylonian version of Cronus, created numerous gods with Tanamit, the Earth Mother. However, unlike the Greek version, this creation of the gods took place over several different generations. The first gods brought forth by Aspu and Tanamit were the gods known as Lamu and Lahamu. These first gods are rather vague deities that do not seem to have played much of any significant part in the consequent myths that came later. They in turn gave birth to the gods known as Ashtar and Kishnar, who were typically thought of being kind of twins of some type. They were normally viewed as the male and female principles of the twin horizons of the sky and earth. This twin symbolism is another vague reference within the myth to the divine twin brothers that we encounter in all these ancient myths. After two more generations of gods being created, it is said that the younger gods started to become a nuisance to Aspus and Tanamit. They clamored loudly across the surface of the earth, and the Sky Father could not quell their voices, nor would they listen to their mother. Despite all the trouble being caused by the younger gods, Tanamit tolerated them, for they were her children. But still the Sky Father could not tolerate their destructive behavior any longer and intended to destroy them all. When the Earth Mother learned of this, she was displeased, and she was furious that her lover would plot to destroy their children and confronted him. Nevertheless, the Sky Father would not listen to his consort, the Tanamit, but instead listened to his vizier, Mamu, the god of knowledge, and continued to plot the destruction of his children. However, the other gods learned of this plan, and one of them, known as Ea, who is more commonly known by his later Sumerian name as Enki, plotted to destroy him. Enki is the Babylonian Sumerian version of the Lord of the Waters, which we know is the same god remembered as Poseidon or Neptune, and is also the same god that is remembered in the Bible that led the Israelites in their great exodus out of Egypt. Remarkably, this version appears to answer why the later Aryan-speaking people originally placed Idra, their name for the Lord of the Waters, as the supreme god and not Shiva, as we explored in a much earlier video. According to this version of the myth, it was Enki, the Lord of the Waters, that originally overthrew the supreme sky father god, and not the Babylonian version of Zeus, the storm god known as Marduk. This myth goes on to say that Enki put a sleeping spell upon the great supreme god, rendering him helpless, and then killed him. Soon after these events, it is said that the mighty storm god Marduk, who was born of Enki and a fertility goddess, was born. After his birth, the great Marduk is said to have been given the mighty four winds of the earth to play with. Some of the younger gods were disturbed by Enki's action of the killing of the supreme sky father, and then went and complained to Tanamit, their mother. After endless goading by the younger gods, Tanamit decided to avenge her fallen lover, the supreme sky father, and go to war with her children. She then created an army of chaos to assist her that was made up of 11 tremendous and terrible monsters. She then appointed her new consort, known as Kingu, as their commander. The Earth Mother wanted to establish him as the new chief and ruler and leader of all the gods. To aid him, Tanamit gave him the Stone of Destiny, which he wore as a breastplate and was said to have given him great power. When Enki and his siblings and the other gods learned of their mother's plan to destroy them, they formed a council of the gods, but they were so filled with despair that they were incapable of doing anything or deciding anything. Eventually, the god Marduk stepped forward and offered to the council of the gods that he would battle the great Earth Mother and her monstrous offspring, on the condition that if he emerged victorious, he would be given supreme rulership over all of creation. Enki and the council of the gods quickly agreed to his demands. As with the Greek version of the myth, Marduk, with the help of the other sky gods, defeats each of the 11 terrible, monstrous offspring of Tanamit, led by her consort. These 11 terrible monsters are remembered in the Greek version as the mighty Titans. Once the 11 great monsters were defeated, Marduk then turned his attention first to Kingu, whom he kills in single combat. After Kingu was defeated, Marduk then turned his attention to the Earth Mother, where a mighty battle ensued between the two that was said to have shaken the very foundations of the earth and threatened all of creation with destruction. After what seemed like an endless number of attacks and counterattacks between the two, Marduk finally called upon the great four winds to incapacitate Tanamit by pinning her against a great mountain. While the four winds pinned her against the mountain, Marduk shot a great arrow like a mighty thunderbolt into her belly, splitting her down the middle. He then is said to have used her body to make the earth and the skies. After this great battle, a new creation of the world took place, where Marduk used the blood and the fallen Kingu and mixed it with the clay to create a new humanity, who were to be tasked with doing the work of the gods upon the good earth. This Babylonian version of the serpent-slaying myth provides us with a slightly more information on the gods' possible political action than the later Greek version. One of the more striking points is that the Lord of the Waters was the original god to overthrow the supreme god, and who is later replaced by a god he helped create. Although he loses his throne as the supreme god, the Lord of the Waters is made the king of the gods and rules over earth. We can also see that the earliest version of this myth compared to the Greek version, and how it changed over time and removed this information, which, as we've already explored, would most likely done to help keep the peace of the people of the later peoples that the twins conquered. It's also an indication that this event is not the major factor in how these events played out. For us to make sense of these events, we need to combine these two versions of the myth with our esoteric knowledge that we've gained through our journey. Once we do that, we can begin to speculate with some confidence about what might have motivated the gods or Terrans and why these events occurred. Although it may not be apparent, but both versions of the serpent-slaying myth imply that the heaven was not under control of the Terran government, nor was it under control of the Terrans on Earth, which are remembered as the Earth Mother. Based upon the available information that we have from the myths, it appears that the heaven was under the control of an unknown third party or organization. Party that was powerful enough that it required the combined forces of both the Terran government and the Terran faction on Earth to dislodge it from power once it had made the decision to remove the great machines from the Earth. Remarkably, although we do not know the exact details, all the versions of the serpent-slaying myth agree that the problems begin when the great Sky Father decided to remove all his children from the surface of the Earth. These children are the great machines that our Cro-Magnon man ancestors viewed as the mighty titans, the terrifying, powerful monsters that were created by the gods. This decision to remove these machines is the reason that the first uprising or civil war of the gods occurs. We can also speculate that the decision must have had a tremendous economic impact on their society, and especially for those here on Earth. Unfortunately, there does not appear to be any surviving information why the party in control of the heaven actually made this decision. Although we may not know the reasons behind this decision to remove the great machines, we do know it is why there was a civil war and the eventual takeover of the heaven by what appears to be the Terran government with the help of their allies on Earth. One of the most important changes that surround this takeover of the heaven is that this is the point in time where the mighty heaven floating up above the clouds ceases to be a thing or God and starts to become a place where a mere mortal could go and return from. Within the Babylonian myth, we were also told how Enki had killed this Supreme Father and then entered into his body and made it his throne and the abode of the host of heaven. Once this first takeover was accomplished and the heaven was firmly under control of the Terran government, there appears to be some type of political arrangement where the original ruler was quickly removed and replaced with another. Soon after this political change, or possibly during it, a second and much more destructive civil war erupts, first against the great machines and then with the Terran allies on Earth. Unfortunately, the ancient stories do not provide us with enough information to precisely explain why this second part of the civil war erupts between the one-time allies. However, according to the myths, the problem arises once again when this new supreme god makes the exact same decision to remove the great monsters from the earth as the god he just overthrew was originally planning to do. Once again, the myths do not provide us with enough information on why this decision was made. But once it was made, a new and terrible destructive civil war erupted between the former allies when the Terran government began destroying these great machines. While these great machines were being destroyed, the Terrans on Earth and their allies go to war with these new rulers of the heaven, which we've been speculating is the Terran government. Within the Babylonian version, it was these other gods that ultimately convinced the Earth Mother to turn on her one-time ally. This implies that the entire situation was far more complicated than our Cro-Magnon man ancestors could have possibly understood. With there being numerous economic, social, and political forces at work that were just entirely beyond their understanding or even their ability to know about in the first place. Although we may not have many of the details or the actual inner workings of the Terrans leading up to this war, we can easily begin to start understanding some of the possible economic and political forces that were working behind the scenes. Using our own modern society as a guide, it's easy to understand how removing the great machines must have had a huge economic impact on Earth. Although we do not know exactly how their economy or their society was organized, it makes little difference when an entire section of the economy is removed and thousands of jobs disappear along with the resources they produced. Even if they had a complete command economy, this type of economic upheaval would have resulted in many individuals needing to be relocated and possibly even retrained. This economic upheaval could be the reasons why the Terrans on Earth and their allies would have felt betrayed and went back to war. It would simply have been because their way of life that appears to have existed since before the fall of the Watchers was going to be destroyed. Although this is only one possibility, and the truth being that we may actually never really know the true motivations behind the Terrans for this civil war. Although we are missing large portions of the details leading up to this outbreak of the War of the Gods, we do have a great amount of detailed information about this war and its aftermath. In all versions of the myth, we are told that this second part of the Civil War was almost the end of everything as the mighty sky gods were locked in battle, first with the terrible monsters and then eventually with the Earth Mother herself and her last horrible offspring, depending on which version of the myth we look at. This is the vital clue to understanding that the most extensive and mysterious radioactive spike we explored in our journey through the dream vision of Enoch that dates approximately to 32,000 BC is direct evidence of this massive war of the gods. It is also a clue that allows us to realize that this great war of the gods is what is recorded in the Bible as the 10 plagues of Egypt. It is also easy to understand that this war of the gods was why the 10 plagues fell upon Egypt in the first place and the reason behind the Exodus. This then allows us to begin understanding what the Terrans were really doing. As the myths tell us, this new sky god and the new supreme god's leadership were victorious over the monsters and the forces of Mother Earth. This victory then leads to the next part of their plan, the great exodus out of Egypt, and the establishment of a worldwide network of major kingdoms founded by the divine twin brothers after they had settled in the land of Canaan. The primary reason for this was to replace the mighty machines with a new, more environmentally friendly system that supplied them with the resources and materials they needed. It is also equally likely that this monumental change was all done for economic reasons. It's easy to understand that the great machines may have just become too costly to operate, while human slaves who took care of themselves were much cheaper and easier to handle. Additionally, according to other myths, we were told that there was also some type of labor dispute that was occurring among the gods that may have been a major factor in removing the great machines. Within the epic, we learn of a group of lower-ranking deities known as the Igigi, who were put to work by a council of 7 gods, with the leader of this council being the god Marduk. These Igigi were said to have been tasked with digging a new large irrigation canal. The myth implies that the work was brutal and the god Marduk was oppressive to these Igigi. In time, they rebelled against the sky gods by setting fire to their tools and then surrounding the great house of the gods one night in protest. Upon hearing of the toil of these Igigi and of the irrigation, and that the labor of the irrigation canal was so great, the council of the 7 gods decided to create man to carry out the agricultural labor of these lesser deities. Within this myth, it heavily implies that the entire situation was vastly more complex than traditionally believed, and lends weight that the idea that the removal of the great machines and replacing them was done primarily for economic reasons. As we've learned, once the great machines were removed, they were replaced by the Indo-European speaking children of Israel under the leadership of the divine twin brothers. In the process, these tribes destroyed the existing Bronze Age civilizations they encountered while establishing their new kingdoms and fusing with the local cultures. All the evidence that we have says that they established a strictly agricultural society centered around the complete submission, devotion, and service to the whims of the gods that was administered by powerful kings and an equally powerful priesthood. These kings and priests were the descendants of the original leaders of each of the tribes that took part in the great Exodus out of Egypt under Moses and Aaron, and then later under the divine twin brothers. In time, this entire event becomes remembered as a new creation of humanity. If we take a moment to explore this creation of humanity with our esoteric knowledge, we will quickly realize that there are now 4 separate and very distinct creation stories of humanity. The first creation story was the creation of the first men with the species we know as Neanderthal. Based on the latest archaeological evidence, this creation of the first men may have occurred as far back as 300,000 BC, possibly even earlier. The second creation was during the time of the fall of the Watchers, with the mysterious genetic reset of 90% of the animal life on the planet between 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, which is vaguely remembered in the first chapter in the book of Genesis. The third creation is when the gods took Neanderthal and broke him into 2 subspecies, with one being Cro-Magnon man, with the other being the more mysterious hairy man of legend at approximately 39,000 BC, which, as we explored, is also remembered in the book of Genesis as the birth of Jacob and his brother Esau. Then we now have a fourth creation of humanity at around 32,000 BC. Then we have a fourth creation of humanity at around 32,000 BC. However, this event does not appear to be a physical creation of a new species of human like we had seen in the past. However, it is a more symbolic creation because it is the creation of a new society that was populated by a new man who was utterly devoted to fulfilling the needs and wants of the gods. Based on the historical evidence that we have, it is challenging to say how long this entire process of the second phase of the Exodus under the leadership of the twin brothers may have taken. It may have been as short as just a couple centuries, but possibly taking a few thousand years to unfold. The available evidence seems to support the idea that the second phase of the Exodus and the settlement that came with it occurred over a period of thousands of years. Historically, we know it usually took a few generations for these new Indo-European speaking settlers to fully take over and be integrated into the local population of the various cultures they encountered, thereby creating an entirely new culture with new languages in the process. This supports the original esoteric timeline we explored in the beginning of our journey, with 40 years of wandering in the wilderness by the Israelites is actually speaking of 40 generations, with each generation being approximately 140 years in length, which gives us a total of 5,600 years. This allows us to place the event of the great Exodus out of Egypt, the settlement of the land of Canaan, and the events of the second phase of Exodus under the leadership of the divine twin brothers, with the establishment of an entirely new pantheon of gods occurring between 32,000 BC to approximately 26,400 BC. Although we may not know precisely how long this entire process took place, we do know that once this new world order had been established, humanity entered a new mysterious dark age that begins with the great Bronze Age civilization's collapse. It was an age where the only reason for the common person's existence was the complete and utter devotion to the never-ending service to the will of the gods. This great dark age was a time of religion that was very similar to the Middle Ages of Europe, where the Catholic Church, with the aid of local rulers and kings, ruled with an iron fist and where heresy was punishable by death. If we take a few moments and look at this situation with a modern eye, we can easily understand that the entire purpose of the Great War of the Gods and the Exodus was to establish this new worldwide network of similar kingdoms. And this was done simply to provide a cheap, steady supply of food and other resources for the Terrans and their civilizations. We can also realize that the most likely reason the mighty Titans were removed from surface were primarily due to their high cost and the problems it took to maintain these machines and the numerous labor problems that were related to their use. It just was vastly simpler and much cheaper to have humans do the work instead of these massive machines, and it also was getting rid of the costly, never-ending maintenance that must have existed around them. It is also highly probable that these machines may have been thousands upon thousands of years old and had simply outlived their design lifetimes. This provides us with a new insight into the Terrans' economic and politics by showing us that there was at least one faction of the Terrans, most likely the Terrans on Earth, that opposed using our ancestors in this way. Not only did they oppose it, but it required a highly destructive war to make it happen. Using our own society as an example, this implies that removing the great machines must have led to a tremendous economic loss for the Terrans on Earth. Although there appears that there was substantial political and economic opposition to using humanity in this manner, it was ultimately, in the end, the system that prevailed. Once this simple agricultural system with its equally simple religious and political system was established, it appears to exist and worked for countless generations. That is, until the building of King Solomon's temple and citadel, better known as the First Temple. The building of the First Temple and eventually its ultimate destruction is the key to understanding the next series of events that were to unfold in this saga. The events surrounding this building also allow us to answer a few of the mysteries that still surround the mysterious shepherds that are spoken of in the dream vision of Enoch. As we have learned, before and during the building of the First Temple, a new religious belief was beginning to take hold in the ancient land of Canaan. This new religion was the highly radicalized and often violent sect of Zoroastrianism that preached a strict monotheistic doctrine. It was this religious sect that not only rejected and mocked the drug-fueled mass animal sacrifices to the gods, but it also rejected the very gods that were supposed to be the primary object of humanity's devotion. Remarkably, it also did something else that no other religious belief had done up to this time before, which was to place humans, and especially the individual, at the center of its religious doctrine and teaching. As history shows us, these radical, humanizing ideas had a significant impact on all levels of ancient society. We're also now aware that it was a radical, strict, and often violent sect of this new religion that exploded to the forefront once the First Temple was completed. By understanding the rise of this radical sect of Zoroastrianism, we can speculate with some confidence that this new religion may have been the primary reason why the First Temple was built in the first place. It is easy to imagine how the spreading of this new human-centered belief system and doctrine would have been a threat to the existing political, religious, and economic systems that had been established by the Terrans. It is highly probable that the Terrans were hoping that the First Temple would unite the people and return them to the original polytheistic religion that had been established. Unfortunately for the Terrans, this building of the First Temple appears to have had quite the opposite effect, with it ultimately resulting in not only the destruction of the First Temple in a remarkably short time, but also a collapse of the entire system that had been built to sustain it all. It had other effects that had an even more significant impact on the world that they had created. These other impacts will help explain a few of the lingering mysteries of the shepherds and of the dream vision itself. As we are now aware, one of the most important factors concerning the new temple was a constant back and forth power struggle for control for this building by the followers of the traditional polytheistic religion of Moses and the radical and often violent followers of this new humanized monotheistic religion of Zoroastrianism. According to the Bible, it appears that this ongoing power struggle over the first temple was of little of any concern to the Terrans once the temple had been built. This apparent lack of concern by the Terrans makes sense once we realize that there were at least a dozen or so other big kingdoms spread around the world, with each of these kingdoms being supported by countless smaller kingdoms that were all producing materials and foods to be sacrificed and given to the gods. The disruption from one kingdom must have been only a minor affair, with only lost resources of food being made up rather quickly and easily by the other kingdoms. It is even possible that they were creating such a large enough surplus that there was no real concern if even one or even a few of these kingdoms began to falter. Although it appears that this power struggle was of little concern to the Terrans, nevertheless, according to the Bible and the dream vision, there were at least two separate times that it became enough of a problem that the Terrans sent messengers and prophets to help lead the people back to the original polytheistic belief. The first attempt was the ever-famous prophet remembered as Elijah. The second was the sending of the messengers of the equally famous scribe known as Enoch. The second time the Terrans sent messengers among the people is by far the more important of the two events. However, the biblical account lacks many of the details of the events that led up to the sending of the messengers of the Lord. Although the Bible lacks many of the details of the matter, we can now understand that the primary reason that Enoch and the other messengers were sent was due to this new heretical sect that was based on the monotheistic religion of Zoroastrianism. It is also very easy to imagine how this new and dangerous religion was beginning to slowly spread outside the traditional lands of the original 6 Median tribes into the surrounding lands and nations. As this new religion spread, it appears that this sect of Zoroastrianism had the same corrosive effect upon society that it had in the land of Canaan, with it leading to these other societies and cultures away from the traditional polytheistic religion. The spreading of this new radical religion of Zoroastrianism, with its outright rejection of mass animal sacrifice, must have began to disrupt the food supply and other resources that the Terrans relied upon for their civilization. This simple realization allows us to begin understanding why this would have become a problem that the Terrans could not easily ignore. It was a growing problem that would eventually require the Terrans to directly interfere with human affairs. By understanding that it was these radical and often violent followers of Zoroastrianism that had taken over the first temple, we can also easily recognize that they were also the people that rejected the message that was brought by Enoch and the other messengers of the Lord, first by mocking them and then by murdering them all of them except for one that somehow managed to escape the slaying of the messengers, the one remembered as Enoch, which according to the dream vision, Enoch was eventually rescued by the 3 that came and looked like white men, with one of them being the king of the gods, who we now understand is the great Lord of the waters. The slaying of these messengers is the pivotal event that leads the Terrans to directly interfere with human affairs, with one of the first results of this direct interference being the destruction of the first temple and what became known as the Babylonian captivity of the chosen people who had been corrupted by this radical, human-centered sect of monotheistic religion known as Zoroastrianism, a people who will later become known as the Jews. There was another remarkable unforeseen effect of this spreading of Zoroastrianism and the destruction of the first temple. This unforeseen effect was that within 1 or 2 generations of the first temple's destruction, the great dark age that had befallen humanity with the coming of the twin brothers ended abruptly. Not only did it come to an end, but it appears that the native populations violently overthrew the kings and the priesthoods. Soon after this overthrow, we see an incredible explosion of culture, government, trade, building, the arts, and writing worldwide, with all the wonderful things that become known as the classical age of the ancient world. Not only do we see a great cultural and economic revolution, we also see many of these new cultures and civilizations become much more human-focused, with many of them slowly starting to question the gods themselves and whether humans should have anything to do with them. This allows us to realize that once the first temple was destroyed and the followers of this radical sect of Zoroastrianism were led away to the city of Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, it would have significantly weakened the political claims to power for all the earthly rulers and priesthoods of all the kingdoms spread around the world. This general weakening of the political power of the kingdoms, combined with this new human-centered monotheistic religion of Zoroastrianism, provided an opportunity for the common people to rise up and overthrow their overlords. After these kings, priests, and their supporters had been removed from power, the local population appointed new kings and new leaders that their ranks were based upon their own ancient traditions and lines of power. In turn, they quickly set about restoring their societies to the way they were before the coming of the divine twin brothers. They also set upon the task of removing the very memory of these former rulers and this dark age in general by destroying everything that was connected to them. Once this was accomplished, and these kingdoms and nations quickly grew into the mighty civilizations of the classical age of the ancient world, with many of them giving birth to what we now know as the Western tradition. In our next video, we'll put all the different pieces of this esoteric puzzle together that will allow us to speculate with some confidence the real reasons on why the gods or Terrans were exploiting our ancient ancestors and what led to the destruction of everything. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below and don't forget to subscribe for future videos.